What an absolutely crazy French Grand Prix MotoGP just produced. Val, I don't think we had any money on Johann Zarco and LCR Honda winning a race anytime soon. We didn't even have any money on that in the first few laps of the race either, when he was only just staying upright in absolutely wild circumstances. What an afternoon.
Insane. Honestly, the dread I felt in those first laps, because, you have to break down the race afterwards, and I'm sitting there. I have no idea what's going on. I really struggled to make heads and tails of it, but I really tried today, so let's see.
Yeah, I think as this video will make clear as it goes on, you did a very good job of unraveling what was going on in that wild race. Simon is in the Mom paddock. He's been outside LCR Honda to see what's going on with the celebrations and explain how Zarco pulled that off.
So rather surprisingly, given that the whole of the rest of France is partying tonight, it's actually quite quiet behind me at the LCR trucks. I think that there's kind of a general state of shock about what just happened, about what we just saw in the French Grand Prix with their French rider taking a win that absolutely no one expected. I just bumped into Johann's manager just before I started recording, and he just looked at me and said, speechless. They're just absolutely stunned, and it's not really much of a surprise because no one expected that Johann Zarco would win today. There was a lot of hope that Johann Zarco could do something, especially whenever we saw the wet conditions. The French fans really kind of decided that it was going to be his chance if it couldn't be Fabio Quartararo's, and somehow with not through luck, through absolute sensible strategy, it panned out for him. It worked. He won his home race. The first Frenchman to win a French Grand Prix since 1954 in the Premier class, which is remarkable. It was a case of making a choice early on. Thankfully, him and team boss Lucio Cecchinello made the right call. It helps a little bit that Lucio is a private pilot, and he pulled out his aircraft weather app, saw that there was rain coming, and then they doubled down with that decision. They saw that there was going to be more rain coming. They knew that they were going to be starting on wet tyres on a drying track, but they knew that they had to risk the fact that there was rain coming. They stuck to that call, and it was the right call to make. It panned out for them, and as a result, the whole of France has just gone insane. The noise when Zarco crossed the line at the start of the last lap, even before he took the checkered flag, is incredible. The sound of the Marseillaise being sung by the kind of 120,000 French fans here today on the top step of the podium it's hard to explain just how wild the scenes were this afternoon. And it's not at all a surprise really that the response here in the LCR garage is kind of stunned bemusement. It's just the crazy scene that they've been thrust into the middle of. This is a team that has won before. It's a team that's made incredible underdog wins before. Thinking of Alex Rin's Coda victory in 2023, the last time a Honda won a MotoGP race until today. Or Cal Crutchlow's win in Brno in 2016, the first time a British rider won a race in the Premier class since Barry Sheene. So this team knows how to cope with those big days, and they were here once again for it today. The crew that worked with Crutchlow and Rins on both of those days are the crew that are working with Johann Zarco today. So they're an experienced bunch and they're taking it all in their stride, but I'd imagine that they, like the rest of France, will be raising a few glasses tonight in celebration to this absolutely remarkable feat that they pulled off, thanks to just making the right call and sticking with it. Total commitment from the rider and the team, and it paid off for them.
So Zarco and LCR played an absolute blinder with how they judged that, with staying out on wets when it looked like the wrong decision. But Val, they weren't the only people who could have done that. A lot of riders were really kicking themselves for throwing away the same chance, effectively, weren't they?
Yeah, in a way that was the only decision that mattered, because obviously we had the original start where everybody came into the pits and got the start cancelled, so that effectively doesn't count. But the real differentiation point was that second start and deciding whether to stick on wets, hoping for rain that you expect to come, or just go on slicks and race the normal race early on and then come what may. And you will have seen the image of the 9 bikes on the warm-up lap, on the grid, and then like many more in pit lane forming a huge queue. That's allowed on the warm-up lap. It wouldn't be allowed for the actual start. Out of those 9, one's an imposter, effectively. It's Lorenzo Savadori on slicks instead of wets, but just he chose slicks originally. Honestly, in another scenario, that might be a race-winning move. It was not today. There were 8 guys who picked the right strategy with Johann Zarco, and for 7 of them, effectively, it fell apart. For Zarco, it didn't. So let's go through them quickly. It could have been a huge points day for Pecco Bagnaia in terms of the championship. Could have really rejuvenated his flagging championship battle. But he, coming into turn 3, I should say, the Dunlop chicane, he got hit quite hard by Enea Bastianini. Luckless, but there's also an interesting factor in there. He got a good start. He got into really bad wheel spin, and obviously the wet tires on the dry track. Bastianini, huge speed mismatch. Zarco said he didn't use his ride height device coming off because he almost specifically didn't want to get a particularly good start because he didn't back himself to get the device disengaged into the Dunlop chicane. So he sort of took himself out of the firing line, except he still ended up in it because as images show, that sort of concertina effect jumbled situation ends up with Jean Mir in the path of Johann Zarco. Johann Zarco having to skip the Dunlop chicane. He's basically lost at that point of the race. So there's a lot of other guys who at that point in the race should be winning it.
Yeah.
Most notably Jack Miller. Jack Miller, I think, is the one that we both thought of immediately during the race in those conditions. And I think he was going to have a huge say, but he had a high side at the final corner that he doesn't entirely understand, just as sort of the race was coming to the wet tire runners. Then we have Miguel Oliveira and Taka Nakagami, who saw the strategy out, who, did the correct thing, but neither of them is necessarily race fit. So not a ton was going to be on the table for either, even before Oliveira crashed out also at the final corner with a similar high side to Miller. And that leaves the 3 guys who will feel very bad coming out of this race. Those 3 guys are Alex Rins, Marco Bezzecchi, and Luca Marini. Marini in particular said he was angry at himself after the race. They made the right decision. Going onto the grid, they expected the rain to come. And then, that early melee starts and you understand, I don't want to be here on wet tires. This sucks. I don't like being here. And all of them bailed out on that strategy. All of them decided, you know what, let's not do this today. And for all of them, a podium's gone almost certainly because of that. So 8 guys, but Johann Zarco was the only one who had both the pace and the belief to see out the correct strategy.
It's not the first time in the 2025 season we've seen a decision like this on the way to the grid with weather changing. We saw it at Austin, famously chaotic there with Marc Marquez sprinting off the grid and triggering absolute mayhem. There's been rule changes since then, so what unfolded at Le Mans was quite different, wasn't it? Do you want to summarise how things have changed in MotoGP since that Austin madness?
Yeah, so again, the set of rules for Austin was basically a catastrophe. The race direction had to know what your sighting lap bike was, what your tires were, what reason you're leaving the grid for, etc., etc. It's a whole mess that decides whether you get a ride-through penalty that is race ruining effectively, or at least huge for your race complexion, or you don't. So they've streamlined all of that just to make it whatever reason you leave the grid for, that's a double long lap. But a double long lap obviously is a penalty in terms of lap time, maybe a 1/5 of the severity, a 1/4. It's just not a huge problem. So I think that contributed to as many riders as we saw today just deciding, you know what, I'll take it. That feels good. So instead of a mess on the grid, it was still a bit of a mess, but not a massive mess. We got just constant long lap trips, which also isn't ideal, is it? It's also, you could probably do a little bit better than that, but it was certainly better than the Austin set of rules that are just not workable.
Well, we thought it was better. Simon is not so convinced.
Anyone who's spent any time listening to me talking about MotoGP over the past few years will be well aware I hate flag-to-flag races. And we got a stunner of a race today in Le Mans for the French Grand Prix, and an incredibly well-deserved winner in the form of Johann Zarco. But, I mean, let's be honest, apart from Zarco's win, and apart from the absolute chaos at the start of the race, it wasn't very exciting, was it? It's another one of those flag-to-flag races where actually we end up with huge gaps and not much happening because they're artificial. They're not real racing. They're not the best in the world going neck to neck on track and deciding who's the fastest on the day through talent and skill. Because it all depends on essentially when you come into the pits, what tyres you're on, what tyres you change to, the timing of that. And for me, it feels fake. It feels like rolling the dice. You're not really picking who's the best man on the day through their own talent. Zarco, don't get me wrong, he made the right call today. Him and his LCR team called it correctly. They started on wet tyres and they stuck with him whenever everyone else was faffing around, jumping back and forth between bikes and between tyres. But, I mean, that's what everyone else was doing. We saw Marc Marquez basically admit that he knew that at the very beginning of the race, he dived into the pits because he thought he was going to gamble on the slick tyres, and everyone else, including his brother Alex, admitted that they just followed what he did. And then later on, we saw Alex dive into the pits for a bike on wet tyres, and Mark and quite a few others admitted that they just followed what he did. So it then becomes a game of chase the leader. It's not really representative of the, what we see happening on track, what's going on. And for me, I don't like that. It doesn't feel real. It feels artificial. It feels chaotic. I think maybe my real dislike for it is that I love wet weather races, and there was potential today for a really good wet weather battle with everyone starting on the same tyres. We saw this weather front moving in. We knew it was going to rain today, and a simple 15-minute delay in the grid would have moved everything back to the right time. Everyone would have been able to start on wet tyres, and we would have had a good, fun wet weather race fair and square. In reality, that window was reduced even more to only a few minutes because everyone then dived into the pit for slick tyres, forced a red flag, forced a full restart. Whenever we knew the rain was coming, it was a silly decision for them. It was the right call in that exact moment, but strategically it was a silly decision. And we saw the only guy who kind of didn't play that game today, emerge victorious, which I feel kind of indicates my dislike of this whole format a little bit. I'm glad we saw Zarco win because it means I was right.
That's Simon's take. I have to say, I didn't mind it. Like you, Val, I found the opening laps very hard to work out who was on what tyres, who was due a double long lap, who wasn't. I feel like the MotoGP graphics did their very best, but are still kind of catching up with this evolving situation. All the riders I listened to sounded fairly happy with how things had unfolded in terms of the regulations. I enjoyed Miguel Oliveira's take because he had watched Austin from home while injured, saw that play out, read the new rules and just said everything today, even though it was a weird spectacle with everyone pitting, it was exactly what we expected. So Simon doesn't like it, but do we feel that overall the paddock is okay with this being the solution for such decisions?
Yeah, the paddock is okay, and I think Simon's disagreement with it is more philosophical than in terms of implementation, isn't it? He would like to see this kind of race eradicated. It's a philosophical question. For me, I don't really know where I fall on any side of that debate. We have more than 20 Grand Prix every season, so if a couple of them are a bit random, what do you consider as too random, right? Because there's also some random chance in whether you're on a Ducati that wins everything, or say on a bad Yamaha and bad Honda that are not so bad right now, but they used to be quite bad. That's also an element of luck here and there. It really is a complicated philosophical topic. Today felt okay, and for once in 22 it felt okay. I didn't like how many people were crashing at the final corner, but in terms of the spectacle, in terms of how finally we understood what was happening, in terms of who won, it felt all right. That's just part of races that are this short when they're interrupted by weather, aren't they? It shakes out over a season, but it doesn't shake out over an individual race. We've had in World Superbikes last year or 2 years before, a rookie come in, get that tire call right, and win on their first start. Also because he caught a red flag at the right time. That's even at this level, that's just going to be part of it. And it's just a question of whether, that should be part of it. And I don't have the answer to that question.
And any set of rules and circumstances that ends up with Johann Zarco on an LCR Honda winning in France is basically a winner for almost everyone, I'd say.